Ooh, wait. Ooh, wait. Ooh, wait. Ooh, wait. Now we're looping. Now we're looping. Now we're looping. Where is it playing from though? It's working. We're here. I think it's working. Okay. Okay, we got rid of the sound loop. Cool. Yay! Hello, everyone. So thanks for your patience. So Cate and I do not live in the same domicile, so we are on Zoom broadcasting to YouTube. I was going to say LoopTube, but so there is a little bit of a delay. There's about a 20-second delay between us talking and you guys being able to hear us, which is why it does this fantastic loopy thing. But we can see the chat, so pop questions, comments, and whatever into the chat, and we'll see them. Might be a little bit later, but we'll see them. And yeah, so this is my friend Kat. Kat is in the chat saying hello. Cate is on Zoom with me, wearing a fabulous cloak with some lovely marabou fur trim. And Cate is going to be running a YouTube Instagram called Hacking Historical. You might also know her as Era Eclectic. And we're just going to be kind of chatting about some kind of cloaky things. We've got some history of cloaks. We've kind of been chit-chatting back and forth between the two of us for like weeks, right? And months, always. So we're going to talk about some cloak history. There's going to be some terms. I have a couple of random announcements to make. And yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah. We've got lots of, everybody's here. Joan, you made it. Cool. It looks like everyone can hear us and our mouths are syncing with the sound, which is great. Always good. All right. Well, I guess I will get started with some of my announcements. All right. So I mentioned the Zoom delay. I have a little bit of, I'm generally of the Julia Child, don't ever disclaim or discredit yourself school of thought, but this is getting to a point where I feel like I just need to be kind of transparent with all of you. in that there's some things that are happening that were kind of unexpected when I planned this so along, and it's getting away from me a little bit. So I just kind of want to clarify what's happening. I'm having house guests for Christmas, and I was not expecting that for a number of reasons, including COVID, when I decided to plan this event. And I was not planning on also hosting and cooking Christmas dinner. We moved into our house in March, right before lockdown, and we have no furniture. And so things are still in boxes, and we have to make room for people to make sure they're not like just sleeping on our floor randomly. So that has been taking up a bunch of my time. And if I mentioned in the email earlier this week that I was also not feeling well last week. So I am not ahead of myself enough in the content that I feel like things are going to get posted on time, on topic. They will happen at some point. They just might be a little bit later, so just bear with me. So a lot of the content will probably be talked about in the live chats to stay on theme. And there's another comment that will come in a little bit about the live chats because the next 2 weeks are holidays. But if anyone is interested in collaborating or has their own posts, like make sure you use the tags, because I am super happy to cross promote and share everybody's work. I know that some of the people following the Cloak-a-Long have their own YouTube channels, have their own, it can be an Instagram post, it could be a video, it could be anything. You could be the next live chat guest if anyone is interested in having a chat about cloaks. So moving on from there, because we're just going to do this because it's 2020 and we're going to plow through the end of it because it's 2021 is going to be amazing. We're going to make it amazing. So the Cloak Pinterest board is up, and I will be adding it to the resource page so you guys can find it. It is vaguely organized by color because that's what happened when I put it together. And I might do a screen share a little bit later just to show some things. But speaking of live chats, before we get super into stuff, the next 2 Fridays are holidays. So next Friday is Christmas Day, and the theme for that week is patterns. And the following Friday is New Year's Day, and the theme for that week was fabrics. So let me know in the chat if you would prefer to move the live chat to Saturday or Sunday instead of Friday. I will not be doing both, so just let me know which one you prefer, but it could be like next weekend could be Saturday and the following weekend could be Sunday. That's fine. Let me know what you prefer. You get to vote because you're here. So that's your special privilege for being live. And if neither of those work for you, that's totally cool too. But just to get a consensus of when people are available. There might be special guests next weekend. I don't know. Those are my announcements. Let's see. So far, I am feeling better. Thank you, Joan. And whatever works. Cool. Maybe Saturday instead. Cool. Okay. I was kind of thinking Saturdays, but I don't know if it really makes a big difference. Anyway. All right. Okay. So, cloaks. Things you need to know. What is a cloak? I'm sure we all know this already. Google has some really interesting things to say about cloaks and capes in general. quite entertaining. So, well, all right. So the origin of cloaks is basically an outer garment for keeping warm. They were often used as blankets as well, especially when worn by soldiers or anyone who was needing to camp away from their home for an evening. So we talked about them being made of wool. I will be putting the YouTube playlist. I will be making that. That is set to private, which is why we couldn't find it last time, but I will be making it public so you can see it. And there's some really fabulous and also entertaining videos of people making cloaks. And some of them talk about the different ways people wore cloaks. So it was essentially a blanket that would get wrapped around you. We've all done this. And then it would be secured with a pin or a brooch. But you could easily fold things back over your shoulder, fold extra fabric over your shoulder so that it was not in your way. It's like Cate is wearing a cloak and I'm not. So at some point I might get up and go get my blanket, but so you could easily fold them over your shoulder if you were getting too hot or you needed more movement. And then they kind of became a little bit more stylized. They kind of became more of a circular shape. And they closed in various ways at the neck, usually. Either how Cate is wearing hers over both shoulders or over one shoulder, usually your left shoulder closing on the right. Is that right? Am I mixing that up? So your sword arm is free.
Charge.
Yes. And early on when I announced the Cloak-a-Long, someone made a comment that a cloak and a cape are two different things. And I fell down a little bit of a rabbit hole figuring out what the distinctive differences were between a cloak and a cape. And it was really fun for me. And this will be turned into like a much bigger, I'll turn it into like a formal blog post with like pictures to illustrate and things like that. And maybe I'll pull some of it up. So I found a smorgasbord of people expressing their opinions on what the difference between a cloak and a cape was or is. And it was really interesting. And some of it was a hood. So a cloak has a hood and a cape doesn't. Some of it was length. Cloaks are longer and capes are shorter. Some of it was width, as in a cloak will fully encompass your body because its purpose is warmth, and some of it, and a cape will not. And I think all of that is wrong. And feel free to express your opinions on this. But I found a website that was built by or made by someone who was part of the SCA. It was like an SCA website. Mr. Ragnar Torfason. I don't know if that's his real name or his SCA name. I'm not sure. But he said this, and this is what I think. If you are wearing it, it is a cloak. If your cloak or your coat is wearing it, then it's a cape. And that's what I agree with. For a variety of reasons. And I have a caveat to that. But that is also based on information that I found in Costume Close-Up, which talks about, so the men's cloak and Costume Close-Up has a cape. It has this wide, shorter piece that goes over the shoulders. And that book talks about how in the 18th century, pieces that were attached like that were known as capes. Like even a collar was a cape, a type of cape. I have to dig more into this, but this is where I'm at right now. Another caveat that I have to that is that common vernacular also changed at some point. So at some point, which I have currently determined to be somewhere around the very end of the 19th century, maybe the beginning of the 20th century, we start getting cape as an all-encompassing term. And we sort of don't really use cloak as much. So in the early 20th century patterns that I have found, not like reproductions of originals or like something that is from the period, they're called capes. They're not called cloaks anymore. So here I think we have this sort of like divide. And I have like a weird speculation that it's when it has maybe something to do with cloaks going out of fashion and regular wear for men. But that's my speculation that I need to dig into more. But then we wind up with a whole bunch of other terms as well. And if you all follow me on Instagram, you know how I love my terminology. So we wind up with a couple of other really interesting related terms like mantles and mantelettes. And then there's more specific terms more in the 18th century too, like capuchin and pelerine. And what is that? And how are those cloaks? So there's like, I can probably make like a family tree for you guys to illustrate all of this if you want. So I have some of my basic understanding of what some of those words mean and how they're related. And I'm going to take a break for a minute and just go through the comments. And Cate, if you have anything to add, jump in because that was kind of a lot.
Unmute. I think it's interesting because that timeline matches up with the rise of the superhero in the 1930s in comic books, where they all have capes on.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's where the sort of like, so a lot of the differentiation that I disagree with about cape and cloak came from a lot of like modern like cape and cloak makers, like people who sell to people like us or people who do fantasy things or well, anyway, so people who make and sell cloaks. And so some of this came from them. And a lot of it didn't have sources. It was just them writing articles on like their shop blog. And I haven't presented you with any sources except Mr. Torfison. But yeah, but it's just like, I have to dig a little bit deeper because I want to know more. So Rebecca asked if it seems like a lot of 18th century mantles closed with ribbons versus metal hardware. What's your thought? My thought is that is correct. A lot of them they had ties or they had ribbons and not like a cloak clasp.
I think part of that might be as they like came to rise in fashion and ladies wear and began to be made out of finer materials and to be cut a little bit more deliberately. You didn't need the brooches or the I'm going to mispronounce it, the penannular brooch that would go through the weave of a wool blanket and kind of let it be adjustable. So it became a little bit more deliberate.
Yeah, I can't imagine shoving that through like a silk. Though I think there were brooches that were probably finer brooches on finer fabric mantles, which I'll get to in just a second. There might be a time regional difference. I have to dig in deeper, but I like super I super geeked out on this rabbit hole and I really enjoyed it. So I'm definitely going to dig in more. There might be time and regional differences. There's always caveats, always, always. Yeah, and yes, I am in the 18th century men's group on Facebook. Part of my research for the entire Cloak-a-Long was like searching through the multitude uh, of like era specific Facebook groups and just searching things that have come up, and there's a lot to wade through. There's a lot of information. That is always a really awesome starting point for things because they send you on into other places. Like I think that's how I originally found Sue Falshin's website, and she has the short cloak tutorial on the pattern roundup. And she has a couple of other topics that she has like very studiously dissected on her website too, but that's how I found that. And I also need to like go digging through like some articles and things like on JSTOR, I think, like if there's like some academic papers or something where people have mentioned things. I've found some really interesting information on other topics just by like putting in a search on JSTOR and seeing if somebody has written about it. So as I was looking up cloak and cape, I came up with a bunch of other cloak related terms. And Cate, you might know some of this because the Romans were mentioned quite a bit. So the first term that I came across a fair amount, or that I associated with cloaks, was mantles. And what I discovered was that a mantle is a cloak, but it was intended for indoor wear, which probably had something to do with the lack of central heating, but it was also so like it's not a royal cloak, it's a royal mantle that is often worn by, sorry, weird pop-up window, but so that it's often worn by royalty. You know, that's what you hear at the coronations. They're usually wearing they're usually wearing a mantle, usually with ermine fur sometimes. But so what I discovered was that a mantle is a cloak that was intended for indoor wear. It is often of finer materials, more expensive materials, and it kind of serves as a vehicle for like conspicuous consumption, which I thought was interesting. Mantles and mantelettes tend to be, or mantelettes and capelets tend to be shorter versions of a cloak, and they could be intended for indoor wear or they could be intended for outdoor wear. But I determined in my non-scientific research that cloak length was not a determinant of a difference between a cloak and a cape, because in the 18th century, they were called short cloaks. It was still a cloak. And also some of these more indoor wear type of garments. So again, going back to costume close-up, there's the lace mantelet in that, and that has a hood. But that's not going to protect you from any kind of outdoor element, nor is it really going to keep you all that warm. So that is clearly something that is intended for either indoor wear or is intended as a demonstration of conspicuous consumption. So that was kind of interesting. And then there's some more specific to the 18th century, I think, is the capuchin, and then the pelerine also, but the pelerine kind of sticks around as a term. You see pelerines in the 19th century. And also when I was looking at extants, there are some native like shoulder capes that are by the museum, and I don't know if this is how correct this is, because sometimes there are terms that are used to explain what something is that might not be what they're called natively. So there are native shoulder capes that have the same shape as a pelerine, like the distinctive shape of a pelerine. I'll talk about that in a second. So I don't know if that's just a broad term or how it's used. The Met calls everything a cape, by the way. So if you are searching for extants on in the Metropolitan Museum of Art collection, they're all called capes. And that might just be a nomenclature decision that was made by the museum, and really is not necessarily a technical term. Okay, so capuchins and pelerines. So a capuchin is a type of mantelet. It's shorter, it has a hood, and it is generally made of finer materials. So it's made of silk or gauze or lace, and it usually has some kind of trim, which is often lace. And a pelerine in particular is the one that has the very long fronts. And sometimes they're very, very long and very, very lappet-like. And sometimes it's just sort of like a balance where you can clearly tell that the front is longer than the back. That is what makes a pelerine a pelerine. There's some very dramatic long fronts on some pelerines in it's like either the Met or where else was I looking? The Met or the V&A or LACMA, I think, were the main ones that I've been looking at. So that was really interesting. And then there's further divisions. There's more, guys. There's more. So two that were particularly popular in the 18th century was the Nithsdale cloak, which I think I'm pronouncing properly, which is a long hooded fur-lined riding cloak that was named for the Countess Nithsdale, who helped her Jacobite husband escape from prison wearing said cloak. And so the name sort of stuck, I guess, because she was famous for helping her husband escape from the Tower in 1716. There's also the Roquelaure cloak, which is a knee-length cloak with a skirt vent for riding, named for the Duke of Roquelaure. It has a high collar and it buttons down the front. It's all in the details, guys. And then, of course, there's the Inverness coat, which is the Sherlock Holmes coat, which is a coat, I think, technically that has a cape, has a very distinctive cape on it. So it's not a cloak, but it's vaguely related. And if you search anything cloak, Sherlock Holmes comes up. It's unavoidable. And then going back to history, just reading through my scattering of notes here, cloaks kind of started going out of fashion, except for evening wear or travel wear. But remained more common in women's fashion for much longer. As I've mentioned before, women were wearing something cloak or cape-like until the middle of the 20th century. And then I guess they mysteriously went out of fashion. But we're going to change that, everyone, right? We're going to change that. So, and I guess there's going back to the original, not like the original, but I'm guessing it stayed as part of women's fashion for longer because a cloak is a great way to stay warm without ruining your nice clothes. So like in the 18th century, you have bigger skirts, you have engagement, you have all these kind of little details. And especially if you have, more expensive, very fine fabric that is making up those details, you don't want to ruin them. Like, shoving your arm with, your layers of engagement through a sleeve is probably going to crush them and, make them all like, wrinkly and not fun. I mean, I'm sure that a number of us have done that when having to go somewhere nice and having to put a coat on after you've like gotten all dressed up to go out. And then you're just like, I just crushed my dress. That's why I think that cloaks stayed in fashion for women a lot longer. Because think bustles in the 19th century, all the crazy trim in the 19th century. Yeah. So I think that's most of what I have. I know Cate has things to add to this.
Oh. I can tack on to the last 50 years if you want.
Okay.
So they kind of died out in the 40s and 50s. There were still some commercial kind of cape patterns that were these kind of cute, short, fashionable pieces. Then they kind of disappeared for a little bit. And in the 70s, there was a resurgence of them with the kind of hippie, faux Renaissance kind of flowy dress look. I don't know the exact term for that, but there's a little bit of a resurgence with those. And then there was some long cloaks that kind of the hippie community was fond of, and they kind of infiltrated a little bit more into fashion then. Then after that, they kind of died out a little bit until recently. And Game of Thrones actually had a pretty big impact on the fashion industry. For probably four or so years, and there's still some now to an extent, but for about 4 years or so, there were a lot of caped jackets that had kind of a jacket in the front and kind of a cape in the back, in women's wear, mostly on the runways, which is kind of fun. And so we were seeing them at award shows, and we were seeing them on red carpets and in different places. And they've kind of dropped out a little bit now that Game of Thrones is over and had its last couple seasons, but they're still pretty awesome. And I think those pieces will endure more in like the present mind.
Yeah. Agreed. Yay, Game of Thrones changing the world as we know it.
No.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. There was going back to Facebook groups, there was someone who, I think it was in like a history bounding group though, who was asking about how you drive in a cape. And the responses were really interesting. I think some people were like, yeah, like I don't wear long cloaks in the car, which makes sense. But a lot of people were just like, it's really not a big deal. It's actually way easier than like having to take off your coat. And I overheat a lot in the car and tend to wind up like having to take my coat off or my scarf off. And it's just like, I wonder what people who are behind me or like next to me who are watching me are thinking. Cause it's literally just like I'm just like, and trying to get out of a coat in a seatbelt is terrible. Especially if it's like a longer coat or a heavier coat. And I think a cloak would be way easier to just like, and not have it on you.
It's funny because that sort of stuff pops up historically too. A lot of the traveling cloaks are thigh length, so they fit around you when you're sitting on a horse. One of the cloaks I'm looking at patterning and making for this cloak-a-long is a Spanish riding cloak from like the 1580s. I might have the wrong decade, late 1500s, and it's a mid-thigh length cloak that's specifically meant for horseback riding. And the cassocks, which were popular in the 1600s, like the Musketeers' famous blue ones, are also about thigh length so that they don't get in the way if you have to ride around, which is kind of fun. Or you get the really, really long fantasy ones in like a medieval portraiture. Tapestries that are just draped over the back of your horse.
Right. Yeah. Yes. And they pull nicely on the floor when you're not on a horse. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like, I don't know. I just think they're great. I love, there's like 30 suits too that have like, instead of, there's like a jacket, but the cloak will like button with the collar. Like it does like a cool thing and it's like part of the suit and it looks really great. Anyway, that was slightly tangential. Sorry. We're talking about horseback riding and the practicality of cloaks, and I'm on a 1930s tangent. What else is new? But Yeah, I think they're way more practical than people think they are. And I had I had a bit of a really entertaining experience just going through like putting in cloak in Google and then looking at people also ask questions. And a lot of it is like, is it cool to wear a cape? Is it socially acceptable to wear a cloak? Like, and then some of it was like kind of funny questions like, who wore cloaks? And I'm like, everyone wore a cloak. If we're talking historically, they're just, it had a really, it was really entertaining. So I feel like if anybody is stressed out during the holidays or is getting frustrated with their project and needs to walk away, I highly recommend going through some of the answers because some of them are really funny. There was an article that was quoted in one of the answers about whether it was cool to wear a cloak or not that said that you shouldn't wear a cloak because everyone will think you're in a cult. And I was like, I just started a cloak cult. That's amazing. And I found it really funny. But that's really just me, probably. So we have some really fascinating comments coming in from Erie, and I need to make sure that I save that somehow so that I can either repost it and look into. But she's talking about cloaks in Ireland. And how there's like a rich history of cloaks and mantles in Ireland. And I'm going to have to save this so that I can actually read through it a little bit better. Cool. I think, no, do we have anything else, Kate? We want to like, I feel like it's starting to get dark. It's really overcast and it's snowing right now. And I feel like it's really, I feel like I look really dark, but maybe that's just my computer. Do we have anything else?
It's not very helpful, but I really love the cloak cult hashtag, so thank you.
I added it because of you. Yeah, Zadie's cloak cult. Let's do it, guys. Let's do it.
I keep getting distracted by these great Irish cloak history notes.
No. And you know how I love dress restrictions.
You do.
So not actually related to Ireland, but sort of generally related to the UK. Kate and I organized the 18th Century Society of Colorado, and we threw a Burns Night dance, not a dinner, but a dance last year, and it was really popular. And that was really fun researching the act of proscription and the restrictions on dress. So I'm kind of interested to also look at this on now the ban on traditional Irish dress is something I need to look into, which looks like it happened earlier than it happened in Scotland, but always fascinating. I love it. Yes. Very cool. Anyway, so I guess if anybody has any questions or comments or things you guys want to add just before we finish wrapping up, I guess we'll go there. What else? Oh, I guess I can I do this? How do I do this? I'm used to using Zoom on my iPad, There's so many more options when you use a computer. So I'll just share this at the end. I pulled up the Pinterest. There's a ton of stuff in here, but
Oh, that short cloak with the long front.
this one,
Yeah,
yeah.
great.
There's a YouTube video that will be in the playlist where someone remakes this one, which is cool. This one I also discovered has a waistcoat attached to it, which I didn't realize. I discovered this because of Kendall. So there's a waistcoat inside this cloak, and I really want to see how it's all put together.
It kind of reminds me of the oh gosh, the 18th century. It's not a pet en l'air. The jackets with the sack back.
Mm-hmm.
The hoods.
Oh, now I'm blanking on what they're called, but yes.
Yeah, that sometimes attach to a waistcoat as well.
So this is a really beautiful pelerine.
Wow.
It has really beautiful floral embroidery on it. I highly recommend looking at it. It's gorgeous. But yeah, so I tried to find a mix of we're not really hitting men's cloaks right now, but there's men's cloaks in here too, I swear. And there's some really good hood information when we get to the hood section of this party. And I also thought that this costume from Outlander was a full-length cloak with capes. It's not. It's a short cloak over a dress made out of the same fabric, which I didn't realize at first. That's a really fun look. We've got our musketeers and this cloak. Is this one made out of leather, Kate? Is that
No,
what you
it's
discovered?
wool.
It's wool?
It's a wool outer and a wool lining. Yeah, I've been hunting for information on that particular cloak.
So I have some more things to add to this, but this is kind of where it's at. If people need inspiration or ideas, and there are some patterns that I think are not on the spreadsheet that are at the bottom of this. We'll go a little faster. Where is it? They're more modern patterns, but some of the shapes are kind of interesting. And the thing with a lot of these cloaks too is that you could get a pattern like this one, which is like a very modern, very easy vogue, and adapt these shapes. Like if you put a hood on this, you could probably use this long version for something more historical-esque looking. You know, you could adapt this into this. So I think that's interesting, just looking at the shapes. And some of them are just fun. Like this one is just really fun and of a certain time period, but also looks very warm and cozy, personally, I think. So the Pinterest is up. I will put a link in on the resource page, and I will probably be adding more to that. And I'll write up a blog post that is all my cape versus cloak, and I'll put it in a more concise and illustrative manner for those of you who are curious. And I'll keep diving into it and like definitely share interesting things with us if you if you find them, like I'm going to be digging into, I'm a Brunswick. That's it. Thank you, Rebecca. That's what it is. That's what we're talking about. With the waistcoat and the hood. Yes. So I'm going to be digging into Irish cloaks now. So yeah. Well, what else do we have? Do you have announcements? What cloaks are you making?
Oh,
Planning on making?
that are probably making. I have a list. So far, I've cut out a 1640s-ish cassock pattern out of a black wool with a gold lining. And what else am I doing? I'm going to be making a cotton voile mantelet, similar to the one in costumes, historical costumes through history. The one with the red cloak. That one. I can't think today. I need more coffee, but I'm going to be making a black voile one like that because I do not have black silk lace. So let's see. I'm making an adaptation of the again, I think it's 1580s riding cloak, which is in your Pinterest board. I saw it. And the original one's made out of felt, and I am not making mine out of felt. So I'm going to do it out of a wool as well. And then I'm trying to make an adaptation of the Bogston cloak from, I think, the 1400s. I believe you have a video on that on your playlist as well.
There will be a video on the Bogston man cloak, yes.
And I'm going to be making that one out of your gorgeous raspberry wool. So shout out if you guys still haven't gotten your cloak material, since I think this week is materials, right? Was it this week or was that last week?
In 2 weeks, we'll be talking about fabric again.
Well, if you need to get some fabric before we talk about fabric in 2 weeks, check out Zadie's store. It's got some great items in there. So
yes. And I think this was on the email, but for those of you who might not be on the email, the pumpkin color is discontinued. So what I have left is what I have left.
Don't tell me. I want to buy it all.
And I think the other, what is the other announcement I have about that? I don't remember. Anyway, moving on. You're also making hoods. You're attempting to make hoods.
Yes, one of my weak spots is medieval hoods, is what I've learned. I'm on my 6th mock-up and it's not working. So I will figure this out eventually. I have a Viking hood, which I made after I failed to make a medieval round hood last time I tried doing this. So I'm going to do that. I'm filming it. So if you guys are interested, you can watch all my failures. And then I am going to make a video about how to do the fan pleats in the back of the more 18th century and Regency era hoods as well, because those are kind of tricky. But they're a cousin of the cartridge pleat, I believe. I will have to do some failure experiments and get to the right one.
Cool. I talked about what I was making last time. And I'm going to post, I'll make a post about it too. But all right, well, before we wrap up, I will probably be doing the next 2 live chats on Saturday, tentatively. So mark your calendars, and then we'll go back to Friday when it's not a holiday anymore. But I'll announce it. It'll be in the email. I'll announce it on Instagram so you'll know. And aside from a weird technical difficulty, this worked. So I think I'm going to schedule. I'll schedule the YouTube so you can plug in the reminders because I think those are really handy anyway. So that's where we're going moving forward. If you have your supplies and you're working on things, use the hashtags. We have hashtag cloaked capers 2020, hashtag cloaked capers, and hashtag cloak cult. And I am following and checking all of those and reposting and sharing things. And you can also just tag at Zadie Grossman and I'll find it. Yeah. So I'm super looking forward to seeing what everyone is making. There's fun stuff coming up. Might be slightly delayed because of holidays getting in my way. But I plan on having everything sort of happening at some point, even if it's late. So at the very end, there will be like a nice complete resource page with all kinds of information and things. I've already been asked to do this again next year. I can't think that far ahead because I still have to get through this year, but I guess we'll see how we feel. Maybe we'll do it not over the holidays next year though. My holidays are usually not this busy. So, all right. I think we're going to wrap up. I'm going to look at the comments and I will see you all next week, which is very exciting. I'm so excited. You guys all make me so excited. I always get so motivated and excited after these live chats. I hope that's how they are for you, for all of you. But I'm always like, just having other people excited, and we have like this little sewing circle. I think it's great. Rebecca, you can start sewing. Everybody, you do you. So if you want to start sewing, start sewing. If you want to wait, then wait. If you're just sort of here hanging out because you want more information, like, and you're not actually making a cloak right now, that's totally cool. It's totally just, it's choose your own adventure. So if you fall behind, if you start working and you're like, the holidays are getting away from me and you have to put it aside and you have to come back to it, that's cool too. If you decide you need to, throw your project out the window and you can't deal with it anymore, totally fine. Totally fine. If you decide you want another one, you want to make another cloak, yes, go for it. Do it. Do it. And then hopefully we can, for like fashion show extra details week, we can post everybody looking fabulous in their cloaks, and we can legit have a cloak cult, guys. We can do this. Yes. All right. Well, thank you, Cate, for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you to all of you for being here today. That's awesome. All right. We'll see you next week.